day down there. Yeah, I'll remind you.
Yeah. Maybe they think it's the same, so but they're
New posters. Yeah, I can mention.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's bad. I thought you were bring these lights down.
Okay.
And your stage wash is gonna come on you. Once your stage wash comes on you.
Okay. Thanks. There is one other one going on. I can't remember what it is. Sorry. Very small, right? Went to part of the implementation session. The very first ones this morning to see what they said. It was all about recalibration and everything, how we work.
So I was given a time. Start you guys at 11:05.
Okay, what time is it now? I think we should take. Morning, sun. Wait for the little bright lights, right? It's always good to have a friendly face on the front.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. The program will begin in 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. The program will begin in 2 minutes. Also, this is a great time to silence all mobile devices. Please silence all your mobile devices. Thank you. Enjoy the presentation.
Speaker generally. For the veterinary school. Where you guys? Is it mostly in the veterinary school? Always. We're like digging years.
Years ago, we already had like report, I guess it was 86%.
We're over there now.
There's currently rescuing 80, 83, 84%.
Yeah, interesting, huh? Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Welcome to Plenary number 5. My name is Vatrina Smith. I'm the Associate Dean for Global Programs at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. I also lead a Center for Planetary Health that works across all 10 University of California campuses, so I'll be your moderator for today. Our session today is called Transformative Solutions for Planetary Health, and there's 4 of us who will be speaking with you. I'll do some very brief introductions of our speakers. We'll all share some introductory comments, give you a bit of a framework of what is planetary health in this day and time. We'll do a couple of preset panel questions, but really we'd love to hear from you. So we've saved a good chunk of this plenary to be able to respond and engage in dialogue that you would find most useful. So please, as you hear the introductory comments from each of our speakers, take a mental note if there's things you'd like to know more about or if questions come up, because we will have time to use the microphone spread across the audience in this particular session. Okay, so as I briefly introduce our 3 speakers, and then they can remind you of more and key points as they come up. First, we'll have Dr. Carlos Ferron. He's a physician and a global health professional, passionate about education and committed to health equity, addressing complexity and emphasizing values and shaping a better world. As an educator, he fosters an environment of collaborative learning and knowledge exchange that empowers communities and individuals. He serves as an associate professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore Graduate School. He's director of the Inter-American Center for Global Health in Costa Rica, and he's a senior advisor of the Planetary Health Alliance at Johns Hopkins University. So he'll be giving us a framework, a little bit longer introduction. Next, we'll have Dr. Catherine Machalaba. She's with the Nature Conservancy's Human Dimension Science team. In this role, she's excited to make health-positive conservation interventions more visible, to accelerate progress towards the Nature Conservancy's conservation, climate, and people goals. Catherine serves on the One Health high-level expert panel advising the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations Environment Program, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health in their collaborative work. Third, we'll have Dr. Cedric Colmar. He is a graduate in veterinary medicine with a specialization in public health from the French National School of Veterinary Services. He's developed extensive expertise in animal health, public health, and food safety policies at national, European, and international levels. And since 2023, he's been serving as Director of Partnerships, International and European Affairs at Vet AgroSup, contributing to the institution's strategic development and international collaborations. So first, we'll welcome Dr. Carlos Ferron to set the stage for our plenary today.
Thanks, Watrina, and I'm just pulling out my notes here as I start. I should say, it's really a pleasure to be up here. I've been at CUGH now, I think, 7 or 8 times, and I've participated in satellite sessions and side sessions and workshops and all of the, but it is the first time I'm in a plenary session. So I wanted to prepare as one usually does, with the new slides, so you'll see some new slides, but also buying new pants that, of course, you cannot see. So what I'll try to do is provide a framing presentation, right? As Watrina just said, it's more of a reflection on where we are when it comes down to planetary health solutions. It's not by any means a comprehensive reflection. It definitely has some holes and gaps in it, and part of that is what I want to discuss with you later, hopefully in the Q&A. So if we're going to talk about solutions, right, we need to start by saying solutions to what? And what is it that we're trying to solve? What are these problems, challenges, gaps that we're trying to fill here? So what I'll do next, and when someone was looking at my slides said this should have a flash warning, so I'm giving you a flash warning. I'm going to flash through some terms that are currently used when we're talking about these quote-unquote challenges, problems. Some of these terms you've heard in this conference, some of these terms you've heard in the news, some of these terms might be new to you. Okay, so here we go. We have terms like the Anthropocene, the Capitalocene, the Great Acceleration, the Triple Planetary Crisis, Earth Overshoot, transgression of planetary boundaries, climate crisis, pollution crisis, water crisis, biodiversity crisis, ecosocial crisis, poly crisis, Earth crisis. I'm kind of spiraling down into chaos now, right? Now, this variety of terms is not necessarily problematic. It really does, I think, reflect the richness of perspectives that is needed to address the complexity that is these challenges. But how do we make sure that instead of being it confusing, these are actually complementing each other's? And different sectors, health, environment, policy, governance, and different knowledge systems bring really unique perspectives into these framings that will really enrich our discourse. And I use the Babel Tower, the Tower of Babel, here as an analogy. If someone has read Genesis, the book of Genesis, and the Tower of Babel is an analogy of how God created languages to confuse us, right? That's what the lesson is. We shouldn't try to build things that get us to heaven because God will punish us. And I'm not a religious person, I just like the analogy. But it is important to understand as well then that this terminology, landfill sometimes, right, can really dilute action, right? Despite our best intentions, we are struggling to speak the same language, and it can cause fragmentation in how we define and approach the challenges that we're trying to solve, and it can often lead to confusion, inefficiencies in policy, research, and action, and definitely it can stifle progress. It's important to note as well that many of these terms overlap, and sometimes are even used interchangeably, adding to this confusion. And it's not odd at all that in conferences like these, stakeholders and in places like the COPs and other governance spaces internationally, people are literally walking through each other based on these terminologies and not able to communicate what they're trying to address. So here, lesson one is that clear communication is critical to understanding the common challenges that we face, and we really need to come up with ways to do this. It's important to understand that these crises, this is the hardest word in English, crisis in plural, crises, they're interconnected, right? And they don't happen in a vacuum. These are what we call anthropogenic environmental changes to Earth's natural systems, that is human-caused anthropogenic changes, right, to Earth's natural systems, and we see them here. They don't happen in a vacuum, whether it's pollution or marine degradation or climate change or resource scarcity or land use change. They all happen in a complex social context as well, where we have civil strife, we have displacement, we have poverty, we have inequities, we have social and political unrest. All these things are happening simultaneously. But we must acknowledge that these have causes, right? And in global health, we use that exercise a lot, the 5 whys. So why are these happening? So we need to kind of take a step back and say and acknowledge that we have multiple underlying drivers here, whether it's food systems that prioritize yield over sustainability, or governance schemes that allow fossil fuel subsidies and dependence on extractive industries, or globalized trade systems that favor cheap production, or the linear take, make, dispose model that we see every day in shops, whether it's urban planning centered on car dependency, or profit-driven businesses that externalize environmental costs, or economies that think that we can grow forever. All these are at the core of these challenges. But even these have underlying causes, right? And what I think here, it's important to reflect on this, at the core of this lies a crisis of values, right? A fundamental misalignment between the dominant value systems driving human decisions and the ecological and social realities of living on a finite planet. And those are multiple values that are driving these changes, whether it's anthropocentrism, that's framing nature as a resource rather than a partner, whether it's technological optimism that ignores the ecological limits we live in, whether it's consumerism that values material wealth over well-being, whether it's short-termism that sacrifices future generations' well-being for immediate gains, materialism that prioritizes possessions over planetary well-being, convenience that justifies harmful consumption patterns, or disconnection that severs human nature's relationships. All these things are at the core of these challenges. And let us not forget, though, that we are in a global health conference, so we must speak of health. So I'll go through very briefly how these things are connected to health. And I'm using some new graphics that we have at the Planetary Health Alliance here. They're not referenced yet because they're not published yet, but our new website will be launched in upcoming weeks, and you'll be able to see these up and close. So remember, we had these interconnected challenges that are feeding off each other, causing feedback loops a lot of time that are harming and crossing tipping points. Those at the same time will change the more direct exposures that we have with things like the quality of our air, the quality of our food, or the quantity of our food, cause migration and displacement, cause exposure to infectious diseases. And those at the same time are filtered through what we know in public health and global health as determinants of health, and will determine the level of impact that it has over our mental health, our sexual and reproductive health, exposure to infectious diseases, direct injuries, among many other things, right? This is the way we understand how these anthropogenic changes to Earth's natural systems are causing impacts to human health. And if we were to put it even simpler, right, it's this graphic that we're using now in order to communicate how these changes to Earth's natural systems impact different realms of health. Now, remember we came here to talk about solutions, right? And these challenges, as I was naming before, have underlying drivers. And I'm highlighting there the societal values aspect that I was just addressing just now. So these solutions, right, of course, just like the challenges, we have a multiplicity of languages here that are framing how we think about solutions. We surely can't agree on what we call these solutions. But what is it that we're trying to do? Is it something called the Great Transition? Is it an energy transition? Is it a just transition? Is it about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals? Is it about Earth stewardship? Is it nature-based solutions? Is it ecocentrism? Someone might say, no, it's the economy, stupid. Okay, well-being economies, circular economies, donut economies, regenerative economies, degrowth economies, green economies, bioeconomies. No. It's all about the approach. Okay, the public health approach, the global health approach, the eco-health approach, the One Health approach, the planetary health approach. No, Carlos, it's about values, someone else might say. Oh, okay, it's about how we think about ourselves in the world. El buen vivir, summa causai, Ubuntu. It's a challenging one. I prepared. Whakafanangatanga, a Maori term. Similarly, we've built another Babel tower of terminology to fix the solutions to the challenges that we're facing. And again, it's not inherently problematic. Although there is significant overlap between these terms, many frameworks do share common principles like equity, intergenerational justice, resilience, right? Things like donut economics and planetary boundaries and the well-being economy frameworks aim to balance human prosperity and recognize that there are limits to how much we can grow. And recognizing these commonalities helps us build bridges. And that's what I want to kind of focus on here, building bridges. Rather than focusing which term is best, and although I represent the planetary health movement, we really should focus on what are the shared principles and how they can be integrated for collective impact. But do be aware that these terminologies do shape priorities, do shape power dynamics, and do shape funding flows today more than ever, right? For example, climate adaptation may attract very different crowds than if you talk about resilience building, especially today in today's political context, right? And current power imbalances mean that some terms will gain more traction than others, especially in the global north, where indigenous or local perspectives might be marginalized. Some of the terms that I was using, you won't go to a US senator and talk about el buen vivir. It might be hard for them to understand. So terminology is not neutral. It shapes agendas. It determines who is heard and influences what priorities are or what is prioritized. And remember as well that context matters. Different regions, different communities, different disciplines might favor one over the other. And while planetary health, which is a terminology I use, tries to be fully comprehensive, some stakeholders might choose to engage with others, like climate justice or nature-based solutions that works much better in their context. So it's important to move beyond the terminology, and this is what I want to try us to do today, is move beyond the terminology and focus on action and impact. So 3 things here we might want to do: clarify first for communication, align values for collaboration, and focus on impact for implementation. My message to the people here, hopefully, is that don't burn bridges, build them, right? Languages do create barriers. I have examples of this in my own life where, depending on the word I'm using, immediate barriers and castles and silos are built from these approaches, right? Many times than not, the person that you're speaking to, despite them using different languages, share the same values that you do. So now, moving into the next part of my presentation, which is talking about the landscape of solutions, when we look at this funnel that I was showing you just now, we need to understand that solutions can happen in all of this, right? It can work on the determinants of health. It can work on the direct health impacts. It can work on the underlying causes. It can really signify that we can work on all parts. So it's not that one is better than the other, it's that all are needed, especially given the momentum of the crisis that we're going through. And we have these layers. I like to think about these things as layers of transformations, where some solutions are focused more on symptoms or outcomes of these crises, right? This is what we call more damage control. It's more reactive. It's immediate. But it's needed, definitely. We need things like reforestation. We've deforested, we've lost forest, now we need to reforest, right? It's things like cooling centers when there is a heat wave. It's things like direct air capture because we've put so many CO2 into the air. This is one way to approach it, and it's needed for sure. The next level of the layer of transformation focuses on behaviors and choices, but not necessarily changing mindsets, it's changing actions, right? Things like buying a new electric vehicle or meatless Mondays. You do it because it might be like, oh, this Cybertruck's cool, or whatever it might not be, but you're buying it, right? But you're not really changing the mindset on why you're doing it. The next layer of transformation focuses on systems and structures. It's about reforming the rules of the game through policy and regulation. It's about carbon pricing, changing energies, things like the Inflation Reduction Act. These are things that change the rules of the game and favors behaviors change and favors systems and outcomes change. The next layer, going deeper, is about changing paradigms or worldview. It's challenging the underlying assumptions that led to these challenges. Things like shifting from GDP as a positive thing to measure progress to well-being indicators. Think about the degrowth and the donut economic people that are out there advocating for this. And then the last layer of transformation focuses on the foundational values. It's about transforming what societies deem important. It's about things like valuing future generations and valuing the intrinsic value of nature. And when we think of these, right, we can kind of divide them in 2 camps. Some of them are focusing on the root causes of solutions, and the other are more carrot and stick approaches, right? If you don't know the carrot and stick analogies, it's pretty simple. Carrot represents incentives, and stick represents punishments, and these have been long used to drive behavioral change, right? It's things like tax breaks, and as well, things like carbon taxes. All these can be examples of carrot and sticks. And although they're useful, I'm going to say they're useful, right? And they can achieve short-term goals, the approach is mostly insufficient to address these deeply rooted challenges. So to achieve the long-term and sustainable change we want to see, we must go beyond carrot and sticks and transform those underlying values. And I should say, though, right, that although transforming values is important, that'll be in the long term. So we do need to balance and leverage these combination of approaches. So for example, when a policy changes, that can in the long term signal value changes. I come from a place that's called Costa Rica, in which policy changes in the 40s, 50s, and 60s determine our value systems today as a nation. We grow up to appreciate nature as part of our well-being, and anyone that's been to Costa Rica can learn about this. So how do we go from this set of values to this set of values? where sufficiency, care, cooperation, solidarity, stewardship, mindfulness, ecocentrism, equity, justice, among many others, are the driving values that are diluting and, in a sense, stopping the speeding up of the crises that we're looking at, right? And I think these next presenters here are a good representation of this. It's a good representation of our shared values, and I think CUGH does a wonderful job at bringing us together from the One Health community, the eco-health community, the environmental health community, the public health community, the global health community, and trying to find these common values that are driving change here. So I'm going to leave you with the presentations here of our next presenters to explore what are these solutions, more punctually, that through their organizations they're trying to implement. So with that, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ferrone, for a very motivating, I would say, introductory framework presentation. So we're next going to invite Dr. Machalaba to share in about 10 minutes or so her perspectives and some examples of how things are happening that may give you some real life stories about what we can do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Carlos, for such an amazing presentation. I think you got through about 60 slides in less than 20 minutes. Incredible. So I want to talk about some of the work at the Nature Conservancy and really the community aspect that we can learn from. And I just want to really highlight that this work is very science-based. The Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization at its core, and also really take inspiration from some recent reports that speak to a lot of the themes that Carlos mentioned. So recently published this Interlinkages Among Biodiversity, Water, Food, and Health, published by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. The core message from this report is that we need to be considering these different elements at their nexus, and if we only consider one or two, really we see that this is at the expense of the others. So if we're thinking about trade-offs and co-benefits, we really need this holistic approach. We can't get to sustainable development and the outcomes that we know we really need to move forward to without considering these interconnections, as Carlos so articulately shared with us. And then in terms of the solutions, there are some really exciting initiatives that we're seeing that are nature-based solutions for health. To me, this term is really helpful from an investment framework when we're thinking about, are we investing in gray infrastructure, or are we investing more in blue and green infrastructure, and trying to really move even our health systems towards more and more of that nature-based, really sustainable, long-term, durable infrastructure that can help to reduce our risks and our vulnerabilities. So I encourage you to look at this report published by the World Health Organization in partnership with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. There are some case studies from the Nature Conservancy, which I'll share, but it really gives a great overview of how this terminology can be put into practice, and with some really concrete examples. And I just want to really convey to us all that although there are very strong examples here, it was quite challenging for our colleagues at the World Health Organization to find those really elegant solutions. So if you know of them, please don't be shy about sharing them. I think that's a key community of practice that we can build up. And I think it's a great opportunity, again, for that nexus of biodiversity, water, climate, food, and health. So at the Nature Conservancy, our mission is really to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, including human life. So in this, to me, sort of, means that humans are at the center, even though we're talking about landscapes which may be quite far from where some human populations live. In some cases, it's right in our backyard if we're thinking about urban greening, for example. But this is really important that humans and other species are really at the core of this. So it's not just something very abstract, very far away that isn't relevant to us as people, but this human dimension of the work of conservation and climate action is really at the core. And I think that's very fundamental to all conservation and environmental organizations, and more as we see these bridges that can be built to make those benefits very clear. In terms of our reach, there's a lot of different context, and I think that's really important, as Carlos highlighted so well. We need to be thinking about the context. There are some commonalities in terms of the types of interventions, but again, it really comes down to the context at the ground, those trade-offs, those co-benefits, those values, and I think a strength of the Nature Conservancy is we have about 1 million members, so you can really have that local action, that local collaboration. It's never TNC on its own. It's always with partners and at the state level, for example, the chapter members who really are embedded in the local communities. And I think that's core to how the successes can be generated, because there is that buy-in, there is that collective action. We have a long way to go, of course, but I think that's something that really gives me hope. And then a One Conservancy approach. TNC, to my knowledge, is the largest environmental organization in the world. I think it's larger than UNEP by far, the UN Environment Program. And so I think our collective synergies in terms of how we mobilize these networks, including with health professionals, is really important. And across the Conservancy, we're trying to really reduce those barriers of disciplines and make sure that we are working across disciplines, across geographies, and really leveraging our collective knowledge and learning, continual learning from one another. We have very ambitious goals. I won't read them all, mainly because it's very hard to see from here, but hopefully you can see on the screen. But just the top line: reduce climate harm for a livable world. So if we're thinking about climate change mitigation and adaptation, resilient ecosystems for flourishing communities, so reducing the risk of climate-related emergencies, such as floods, droughts, and fires, sustainable solutions for thriving oceans, and healthy lands for a healthier planet. And then conserving rivers, lakes, and wetlands, and thriving communities stewarding global ecosystems. So these are presented as separate lines, but they're of course really connected. If we think about climate systems, if we think about ecosystems and where people fit in, it's the sixth goal here, but it's really core to everything that TNC does. So how we work, we are focused on generating and scaling cutting-edge science. I'll talk a bit about what that looks like. Authentic partnerships that center Indigenous and community leadership in conservation. And really speaking to these first 2 points, I'm so excited that TNC recently hired a director of Indigenous Sciences, Miguel Sui. And this is so exciting in terms of really, when we hear about science-based interventions and investments, and I was just at the Global Environment Facility meeting the past few days, and that is a science-based process. And if we don't have a way of really harnessing that important science and investing in it, then we're already at a loss really in terms of that equity in where investments are going and who has a seat at the table. So very exciting. I hope other organizations will take similar actions. And I think that will be something really important that hopefully there will be a role for at future CUGH meetings in terms of Indigenous science as it relates to traditional medicine and traditional knowledge for health. Ensuring that human rights, gender, and equity are really at the core of our conservation efforts. We have a conservation equity team really focused on that, and it's a continual learning process. We don't have all the solutions. Components like land tenure are extremely important, also extremely complex, and again, very context and community specific. Nature-positive policies, and then finding innovative paths to conservation funding. So nature bonds, really positive subsidies. I think there's such an exciting role for environmental-focused investments, that incentivizing to really pair it up with health benefits and how we measure those benefits. So I just want to give a few quick examples of how our science can inform our work and really the health connection. So we know that Indigenous populations and local communities are so core to protecting the landscapes that are fundamental to the ecosystem services that really benefit our health. If we think about carbon sinks and how they're currently at risk, we see that a lot of the lands that are under Indigenous management are really intact and quite healthy if we think about the integrity of the ecosystem. Concerningly, our science has also shown that these landscapes are very, very at risk more and more in terms of natural resource extraction demands. So we're thinking about trade-offs and decisions that are being made, often with imperfect information, often with a lot of inequity from the start in terms of who's empowered and the decision-making process, and just human rights in terms of access to land, to ownership rights. Really focusing efforts on communities that are facing these really challenging decisions to make, and what's at stake, the cost of inaction. And we talk a lot about prevention versus cure, how prevention is far cheaper than cure when we think about the cost of response. I think the cost of inaction here is if we keep relying on developing these critical ecosystems, and then we're always forced to respond with restoring, and restoration is incredibly important, but it's also costly, and you're starting from a very changed ecosystem at that point, and a lot of usually threats to and impacts to human populations. So how do we really invest in the prevention side to maintain those important ecosystem services and make sure that people are really at the center of that and equity at the center of that? And then I know many colleagues here are looking at occupational health from different dimensions. We've been doing a lot of work on heat and health impacts, and really who is at risk, and then also what the solutions are. So if we think about outdoor workers and their exposures currently, but also into the future, again, they have very few protections often. And what can things like greening and cooling, like Carlos mentioned, cooling centers, how can those really be built into how we invest in health and reducing our vulnerabilities and making sure that there is that equity in our workforce, in labor protection laws, again, really a health in all policies approach. And then just a last example, this wonderful program that the Green Heart program in Louisville that is actually looking at trees as medicine. This is a clinical trial. Just for some background, Louisville has very poor air quality if we look at across the state of Kentucky. And the city also has very high rates of heart disease. So there's this burden of disease that's related to air quality and other factors. And we see that there's also this link to limited tree canopy, and this existing tree canopy is already decreasing, really at a rate of about 54,000 trees per year, which is quite a lot if you think about how many trees. And this is a very exciting partnership between the University of Louisville and the Nature Conservancy and other partners that is really looking at the health of people and the health of trees together. So TNC has the expertise in trees, the selection of trees, and not choosing invasive species, really finding that more native trees and investing in those, and the right way to do tree planting and monitoring for tree diseases like the emerald ash borer, invasive species and pathogens, and good management of the ecosystem to allow those trees to really be healthy into the future. And then the University of Louisville has really excellent clinical trial expertise, and so they're looking at the clinical outcomes from this greening intervention. And a really key component of it is vital community engagement. So certainly from the participation in the study, it's a clinical trial, so there are about 700 people involved in this study as participants, but there's also a key role for volunteers doing the tree planting. There's an art component, really encouraging this framing with poems, with paintings, with going to schools, and really exploring what is this connection between health and nature. What does that look like to each person, each student? And also creating, green jobs. There's also a greening component in terms of, being recipients of having access to trees and tree planting infrastructure. It's called a tree-cipient program, which I love that, the naming. But just to highlight some of the key outcomes, and this is still a study ongoing, so we're yet to see the full scope of the outcomes. And actually, a lot of other clinical indicators have been integrated now. So a lot of measurement here. But the initial findings are that the inflammation-related indicators, so C-reactive protein in particular, has been reduced really significantly from this greening. And you can see the correlation with the reduced risk of heart attacks by 10 to 15%. That's really potentially very significant. So I think this is so exciting to see clinical trials moving in this direction. But from a more sort of individual perspective, just having that utility, that benefit of greening in your community and what that looks like. And you can see along the highway here, the before and the after. But then there's also really a lot just on the sidewalks, on the backyards. So really getting to people's day-to-day lives and their interaction with trees. And I love this quote from a participant that said, it's made my backyard feel like a sanctuary. So the mental health benefits of that and that well-being and connection with nature, I think it's so important and very exciting. So I want to thank you so much for your attention and also for those that are really helping us to work across the Conservancy and work with our partners in the health sector. I think there are a lot of opportunities here. I'm excited for CUGH to bring us together in this community of practice. And I want to just show, if there's time, to show a 30-second video about the role that society can play. So this was an ad that was featured in the Super Bowl, in the commercials, and so it had a reach of about 15 million people a few weeks ago, and it was developed by science moms, really who have this concern about climate change and what it will do to our health. So if our team doesn't mind queuing it up.
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Michalaba, for giving us some very inspiring examples. We're going to invite Dr. Kolmar to give us a bit of a European perspective for our next set of introductory comments.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Katrina, for this introduction. Thank you, Carlos and Catherine, for these very inspiring presentations. Thank you to CUGH for having me today and giving me the chance to speak in front of you. And I was asked to provide you with a quick insight and some very practical example of what we try to put in place and what can be our return on experience in terms of veterinary education and cooperation in view of connecting the integrated approaches for health. And I will be looping back on what Carlos just presented in the use to build bridges between approaches, between actors, between us and what we do. So an insight from a veterinary point of view, but not only, obviously, I'm a vet, Katrina told you, but I'm from Vetagrosup, France, which is, I would say, quite original structure. It was created in 2010 by merging 3 structures in France. One of our 4 national veterinary schools, the National Veterinary Schools of Lyon, which, by the way, happens to be the first veterinary school in France and in the world. It was founded in 1761 by Claude Bourgelat. The second structure is the School of Agricultural Sciences, located in Clermont-Ferrand, in the center of France. And the third campus in Vetagrosup is the National School for Veterinary Services, which is a state school training sanitary officers for the Ministry of Agriculture in France. So we have here a structure in Vetagrosup which is at a crossroad between animal health and veterinary sciences, agricultural, environmental sciences, and also with an insight on political sciences, social and human sciences, through the ENSV, so the National School for Veterinary Services. So, as you could guess from this presentation, we grew up as an establishment in line with the development, the conceptualization and the formalization of the One Health approach in the first decades of 2000s. And this is really what we want to do, what we want to foster. So this interdisciplinarity, these transversal approaches in everything we do, and also in the way we engage in cooperation projects, all over the world. So I will try to give you a couple of examples. First, we have veterinary education projects mixing human and social sciences, but also innovating teaching techniques and methodology. So we have had 2 running in the past few years. The first one historically was a twinning program under the auspices of the World Organization for Animal Health, the WOHA, with the Interstate School of Veterinary Science and Medicine in Dakar, Senegal. So this project has been running for quite a long time now, even before VetAgroSup became a member of the CUGH in 2017. And it was about not only capacity building in veterinary education, but also how this capacity building could fit in the local context and could help improve connected aspects of global health and social organization, such as, for example, the place of animals within societies, resulting in, for example, sanitary aspects related to animal workforce when it comes to, remove garbage from the cities. This is just an example, but also within the distribution of work and workforce, for example, with consequences on women empowerment and societal structure, with examples in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and in all countries member of the USMV, so 14 countries so far. The other one was running with Morocco and also with Angola, also capacity building in veterinary education, but related to innovation and to putting in place of new education techniques, capacity building, competence-based approach, and also new technologies and hybrid teaching modules. The second category of projects we have are more focused on agricultural and environmental science and education and research. We mostly run them through 2 main cooperation programs run at the ministerial level in France, with Brazil and Argentina, with a set of partners in both countries, and both training and research initiatives running every year between partners in France, so mostly us, and in these partner institutions. The third type of project is more focusing on veterinary public health with One Health cooperation project and beyond. So we have one running with Ivory Coast and a second one in preparation with Gabon. The idea there is to, once again, to build bridges and to foster connections between actors. So not going alone on this project, but co-construct both with other partners from the European region and our partners on site. Based on, different observations. The first one is that, of course, it's not that easy to get funding. It gets more and more work to identify funding and resources, but also it represents more and more administrative burden and work to manage this financing activity. So we have to standardize, to reason, and to optimize the way we run, administratively speaking, the project. The second one is, of course, that geopolitical situations in all countries of the world are evolving pretty quickly, and so we have to adapt, and it gets more and more difficult to run projects over a very long time span because of this changing occurring in the meanwhile and completely changing the scene. And last but not least, the fact that, at least in a couple of cases, our partners are not looking for leaders. In some way, leadership is over. What they want is someone that can help them analyze, formalize their need, identify the proper partners, and not only be solution providers, but rather solution developers or co-developers with them. And this drives a change in paradigm from leadership to what we call stewardship, and this is really the kind of thing we are trying to implement through this project. So, for example, in Ivory Coast, we will be accompanying the Ivorian Ministry of Animal Resources in both training its personnel in specific specialties such as biosecurity or animal welfare, but also running a full diagnosis and orientation project towards their idea of creating a national veterinary institute that will be in charge of a series of transversal missions in the field of veterinary public health. And with Gabon, the project that's currently being imagined is in cooperation with different actors from France in other fields of health, and particularly human health, so Faculty of Medicine of Paris, East Paris Créteil, the Numeric University in Health Sciences, which will also help us go in the field in Gabon, analyze what's the state of existing curricula in Gabon, particularly on the One Health topic, and then help them reform and improve those curricula and enrich them with modules we can co-develop with them with new technologies, physical, virtual simulation, for example. So another project that has, oops, sorry, this one is not, yeah. The last one are, of course, One Health dual degrees, so a bit more academic approach, but still that we are trying to build with Vietnam, more recently with Mexico, and we have also intra-European dual degrees with Italy, for example. Another initiative that I would like to highlight today with you is the French academic network in One and Global Health that we nickname the FROG. That, well, for some of you, it will be just another example of what can come out of the CUGH, because the story of this began last year during the Los Angeles annual conference of CUGH with an encounter between, well, me, basically, for Vetagrosep, but also François Dabis, who is from the Public Health and Development Institute of the Medicine Faculty of Bordeaux, sorry. We went to the observation that each of us was working in his disciplinary field with, a preferential view over specific integrated approaches for health, and namely global health for our human health colleagues, and more the One Health from our perspective. But beyond this, what's important, again, is to build bridges and to learn to know each other, to understand each other, and to better work with each other. So as a result of this, it was decided to formalize this network, enabling to connect actors from France and French-speaking regions, mostly, working either in global health and One Health to foster better comprehension and cooperation in the common fields of activity and disciplinary perimeters that I have highlighted here, and particularly in international cooperation and health diplomacy, in training, research, and awareness activity at the crossroad of the objectives of these two approaches. So this is typically what FROG will be doing, and this is also what we expect to be doing in cooperation with the CUGH, possibly as a relay for French and French-speaking regions in the world. So this is a brand new story. The network was inaugurated in last December in Lyon, in parallel of the inauguration of the WHO Academy in Lyon. It's already gathered about 40 members in France and in Europe, and we are beginning discussions to get more partners, French-speaking partners in different regions of the world, including here, because we have also French partners in Georgia University, so there is still things to build, and I hope this will be a fruitful initiative and this will help in the future. So as a conclusion, there is nothing new here, because I will once again be looping back on Carlos' presentation. I would say let's throw bridges. I guess all of you are familiar with this kind of visual, summarizing the different integrated approaches for health, ranging from public health, global health, One Health, and planetary health, and so on and so on. But what's important, once again, is to connect, to get to know, to understand each other, and to work together. So from a veterinary perspective, and I insist on this, what I could say is that the bridge between individual medicine and public health is quite evident. There are several aspects of public health embedded in our training as vets. Of course, we think about food safety, zoonosis prevention, and so on, but also just simply population medicine, which is also a full part of the veterinary training. The bridge between public health and global health is maybe a bit less evident for us veterinarians because it goes to specific disciplines that are more oriented toward human health. That can be understanding of health system, health economy, law, and so on, but still, this is very important. The bridges between global health and One Health, well, it's all about what I've just presented about the frog network, so I won't be back on this. And then the bridge to be built between One Health and Planetary Health is evidence, is just escalating this stuff and these cooperation patterns to zooming out to the maximum level of the health of planetary system and not only of its different components. So this is where I will conclude. Once again, I'm convinced that the way forward is building bridges between us and crossing them together. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Colmar. I'm going to give you one more example of what I think is a transformative solution relative to planetary health. Let's see if we can move forward. And it's perhaps especially appropriate for CUGH. So when you saw the stacked layers of action that might happen as part of Carlos's introduction, I think that university networks are probably essential to be able to really position all of our organizations around the world for coming up with integrated solutions. So in California, I lead a center on planetary health. We work across the 10 University of California campuses. This represents a whole variety of different disciplines with an interest in climate and health in some way, whether it's greening of hospitals or working with populations on environmental extremes. Many different aspects of planetary health are part of the scope of work. But the system, building bridges across university campuses, within universities or around the world, is really powerful. And now we find ourselves at a time of global recalibration. And many of the projects and programs that a lot of us have worked with may or may not continue in the same way. So it is a really important time, and it's a challenge and an opportunity where I think we should be reflecting what are the really important systems and programs and priorities that we can all find new ways to work on, because even if the US government funding is changing in how we're involved, maybe that creates space for others to get involved in ways they haven't done before. So I am hopeful, but I do realize we're going to all have to work together. So when we look at this slide, you can see a map of the different campuses and field sites in California where we work. It just represents a distributed model where there are essentially hub and spokes for taking action. One of the programs I run works with students, and we have a 2-week field course on the One Health approach, and planetary health is a big piece of this, where we bring folks together from around the world, at this point in California, but we've done it in other countries as well, and they experience integrated solutions and the discomfort of working in communities in ways they hadn't thought about, and a safe space to explore and build competencies that relate to One Health and planetary health. So really the students, I think, are what inspires me to keep going and to find new ways to make a difference. You'll see in the top a picture from our ranch. Some people would say it's a sunset. Some of our programs will be changing and sunsetting. Others would maybe say it's a sunrise. And we can think about how we come forward and really look at a new day and what we can do together because we have those shared values. So the one additional example I want to give you represents university networks globally. USAID over the past decade or more has been supporting investment in the One Health space because they recognize that universities are long-term institutions in all of these different countries. And if we can work together, a virtual community of practice or an in-person community of practice on really important problems, we're going to do more together than we can do separately. So the Southeast Asia One Health University Network, the Africa One Health University Network have worked across around 17 countries and with US partners as a big piece of this. I lead this project. And they've really identified global health security, food security, climate and health, lots of different things that can be worked on because universities have amazing students. They have amazing faculty. They're linked to communities. right? So that hub and spokes approach is, again, really important for pushing and pulling information. This has been a form of soft diplomacy as well as action to really prevent pandemics from emerging that we really would worry about otherwise. So these university networks that I'm mentioning, even just in the past 5 years, we've trained over 60,000 people in areas related to the One Health approach, antimicrobial resistance, outbreaks, food safety, all of these different pieces. So the numbers can be quite impressive when you look at both virtual engagement and in-person on-the-ground engagement and what we can do together. And hopefully this training of trainers approach will then help the leaders of the future really rise up and follow through on the values they care about, address the challenges that we face in ways that we hadn't thought about before, because these are innovation hubs, right? These are the places where we hope new solutions are going to come from, whether it's for planetary health or global health security. So what we've created, and it's similar to the CUGH idea, right, is a global network of professionals, of stakeholders, of folks who want to work together. And I sincerely hope that we can find ways to keep this going, even if it looks a little different than it did before. We've heard about the One Health idea, the drivers, the influences, how we address challenges with integrated approaches. So I'm not going to explain this now, but I do want to recognize that it's an evolving landscape. And so one of the activities that's happened is redefining some of the competency domains that this global network thinks is really important. And some of those domains are around technical skills. Others are really about functional skills, domains, competencies, areas of work, which means it's not just what you know, but it's how you approach problem solving. It's can you communicate effectively. So these 20 domains and then the competencies within them have driven a lot of the engagement that we've done. And we've transformed this both for in-person workshops on very specific problems, whether it's outbreaks or food security, et cetera. And then we've also created an online platform. So this One Health Workforce Academies platform is free to the world. We have lots of online courses, case studies, resources that are there. Over 90 countries have engaged in this online teaching platform. So this is something that I hope will keep sharing the ongoing efforts and the case studies and the ideas that have been really inspiring for a lot of our students, for our faculty, for our in-service professionals who've said, sure, I'm an expert in one area, but I want to be more well-rounded, or I want to explore new areas that I haven't done before. And planetary health is perfect for that, right? It's kind of an emerging area that we know is important, but it's a little bit new. And so that can be both scary or really interesting if you give people a way to explore it. So this climate and health course that was created as a University of California product, not as part of my USAID project, is now free to the world because we have a platform that we can share it with, and that global reach is so important. So this has a lot of the key ideas related to planetary health if people are interested to explore more. So as we move into some Q&A with the audience and with our panelists, I just want us to remember, please, as we think globally and find out how we can each act locally, I think that really can make a difference, and that's going to be more important than ever as we go forward. So I'm going to wrap up there. I would invite folks to think a little bit about if you have questions or things you'd like to share, because we're going to go to the microphones in a few minutes. First, I'm going to do a couple questions with our panelists to give you a little time to reflect. But I do want to thank you for being here today and to invite you to use the microphones in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, we're changing gears. So as your moderator, I have asked our panelists to think a little bit about what gives them hope, something that could just briefly be shared now that we are reflecting on how the future may move. So I'll perhaps start with Cedric. Do you want to share briefly with us something that inspires you or gives you hope today as you look at the position of the world?
Well, thank you very much, Trina. That's a very good question, I guess. You might have noticed that the world is changing pretty dramatically, pretty fast. You might call me naive, but I would say that change gives me hope. In the way that change is what triggers adaptation, adaptation is what triggers evolution, and we're talking about health here, and health is life, and everything about life from the very beginning of the story, something like 4 billion years ago now, has been about evolving, sticking together and better organizing to face entropy. Nowadays, entropy has put on many faces, be them global health threats that we've been mentioning, be them climate change and planetary boundaries turning red, be them geopolitical instability. Anyway, those are changes. And my hope is that in these changes, we will find a way to evolve and invent better solutions for the future. Keeping in mind that the change begins with each and every one of us. And I guess all of you remember of Gandhi's wisdom, be the change you wish to see in the world. So change gives me hope.
Yeah. Thanks, Cedric. We're going to go to Catherine next. So change can be something that inspires adaptation and gives us hope. I think that's a great thing to be reflecting on today. Catherine, what would you add?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I think mentorship is really an opportunity, and I love programs like the Afrohoon and Siahoon initiatives because I have seen the power of that. You know, how it really fosters amazing collaborations across countries, across disciplines, and really also empowers wonderful researchers who don't always have those pathways. And so I think that, you know, investing more and more in that, and as things are changing, you know, in from my side, very scary ways. You know, the way that the global health landscape looks right now is not easy. And I think just making sure that we continue those mentorship and understanding that it's a two-way street and no one has all the answers. We are always learning as a global health community, and really seeing how wonderful platforms like CUGH can bring us all together to continue learning from one another in sometimes new ways as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Carlos.
I think, first of all, it gives me hope. You're all still here on Saturday morning. I'll say that gives me hope for sure. But in all seriousness, right, the fact that we are here, that we are able to speak to each other, that despite the challenging times, there is a emerging, so to speak, resistance, but that resistance has been here as well for many, many years. And the fact that we can still talk to each other for the most in a civil manner to try to find solutions to our common challenges gives me hope. I know that is being challenged right now given the political landscape in the United States, and that is definitely in the news all the time, but I know other places in the world that are not going through this necessarily, and that gives me hope for sure. The other thing I would say that gives me hope is the fact that there is now the involvement of sectors that haven't been historically involved in these environmental challenges, like the arts and the humanities and, you know, the literature and poets and filmmakers that are coming into this boat, noticing just how important it is to change how we see these challenges, so, and how we think about solutions. So for me, that when I was talking about values, I really think of that part of the community and that part of the theory of change, on how those can be vital components on how we, you know, change our mindsets and then eventually look for these long-term solutions. So that would be my answer, Katrina.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I think if folks from the audience have questions or things you'd like to ask, I'll ask one more question here, but go ahead and you know, be ready to use the microphone. We'll go to you in just a moment. So I think one more question I would love to hear is, you know, if you might identify one challenge but one solution that you think is important for folks here to walk away with as we think about planetary health specifically, what would that be? Maybe we start with Carlos this time.
Okay, so I want to acknowledge something that we haven't yet acknowledged, is that there's 2 empty chairs over there, right? And that was not a mistake. It was supposed to be 1 empty chair, and then Katrina said we should have 2 empty chairs. One of them is the fact that Catherine reached out to a colleague in the Coca-Cola company, which is based here in Atlanta. And at first, they said they could make it, and they would be here representing Coca-Cola. And we were like, wow, Coca-Cola is going to be here in a panel. He declined last minute, and I don't know if it has to do with some recent announcements of them stepping back on certain environmental commitments that they had originally made. But that said, then, right, that is a challenge. It's challenging for private sectors that want to do things well, or people within the private sector that want to do things well. This person works in kind of circular initiatives within the Coca-Cola company. And people that are there, right, want to speak out, want to be able to tell the world what they're doing. But again, there's backlash to that. We really need this private sector to be in this room and every room where there's solutions being drawn out. Because if not, we're just going to keep thinking that the private sector is the enemy and that they have no role to play, where they have a huge role to play, of course, right? So to your question, then, that is still a challenge, right? And I'm very encouraged by the fact that now our community, what we call global health scholars, public health scholars, environmental health scholars, our scientific community is now being represented in the international spaces where these international commitments via quote unquote the COPs, right? The biodiversity COP, the climate change COP, the plastic pollution COP, there is more of us there every time. There is more spaces for us, right? And so that advocacy, that language that we bring, those frameworks, those data that we bring are having an impact on decisions that are made, right? And I think one of the big actors that is unfortunately not here in this community but has historically been in Trailblaze is Jonathan Path. And a lot of you know Jonathan and has worked in UNFCCC for many years and trying to bring the science of health into the climate change world. So I think challenging, yes, building bridges with some sectors. Solutions is the fact that we're showing up, that we're getting these spaces, and that we're doing advocacy in these spaces, and that these spaces at the same time are every time more not being siloed, but being de-siloed, right? And there's crosstalk between these COPs now more than ever.
Thanks, Carlos. Over to Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's this real implementation gap where we have technologies and sometimes just doing the things that are, they seem very simple, like rabies vaccination. We have the technology, but it's not getting to that last mile to always, really have the effect that it should. And I think that's a failure to act on the things that are really the foundations of public health, of veterinary public health, of environment, if we think about, WASH and watershed management. And sometimes there's so much of a focus on the cutting edge, the next technology that we really lose sight of getting the job done and doing the things that really take the investments and take time and take continuous, day-to-day practicing. And I think that is an opportunity for resilience and working with the private sector. I see, there are challenging roads in a lot of the world, and you can usually get a soda or a beer at those last mile places, and you can't always get vaccines or you can't get samples to where they need to go. So I think that opportunity to work with the private sector is really important, and work with other CSOs in new ways. So I think that resilience opportunity, we'll see what that looks like. Maybe next year we'll see some new opportunities of what is coming together, new partnerships.
Thanks, Catherine. Cedric, would you like to add one?
Thanks. Well, I would say that one of the challenges I can identify today is about methodology, because everything we know in global health and in other integrated approaches for health has been formalized pretty recently, even though the ideas themselves are very old. In the past millennia, they have been called common sense, but they were basically the same. But the methodology associated to the way we deal with global health project is something pretty new, and still the world is changing so fast that when they are formalized, they are nearly already outdated. And I will give you a couple of examples. We had a very interesting pre-conference workshop about global health policies, and one of the main points was about equity, which is obviously one of the pillars of global health policies and action. But then, how do we address and assess equity issues? Well, for example, global economics have now extensively documented the fact that the challenge for the coming years will not only be inequities between countries, but first and foremost, inequities within countries, with socio-economic compartments and communities being particularly impacted. And one of our colleagues during the workshop gave us a very insightful example from Barbados, if I remember correctly, but the fact that in a very small territory where the whole part of the domestic population is still living with a very, very limited income, but this territory comes out to be very, very attractive. And as a result, a couple of millionaires from all over the world will come, buy properties, and then economic statistics about this territory get completely biased. And this territory will count as a high-income country, so we are obviously missing the target. So we will have to reinvent our methodologies, our tools, to be relevant at a good scale, the scale of community, be them within countries or at transnational level, not to forget everyone and not to leave anyone behind. But this being said, we will always have to work out an articulation between these tools and national realities, be them political, economic, because we will always have to deal with this, so there is really a case for science diplomacy here, I guess. About methodology, still, I have been talking about the need to change paradigm between leadership and stewardship. This is also an issue, and it won't come natural for a couple of factors, but I guess it's necessary. And beyond this, I think there is an urgency to rethink completely what we know or what we think to know about the theory of cooperation. I won't get back on Axelrod's theory, but from the beginning, cooperation has been thought as a way to build value added based on each and everyone's strengths. But now the setting is a bit different. It's about cooperating to mitigate common loss. And that's very, very important.
Thanks, everyone. So cooperation and methodologies, stakeholder engagement, implementation science, having the right people in the room to be able to come up with new solutions together. I think all of these are really important areas that we can reflect on. We're going to go to audience questions. We will take, I think, 2 at a time, so we can both remember them, but also make sure to try and play with them. So, we'll take these 2 questions first, and then we're going to go to the other microphone next. So if you'd like to each share your question or comment, and then we'll provide some dialogue and then be able to try and get through a number of them. So welcome.
Hi. My name's Ali. I'm a medical student from Dell Medical School, and this was such an amazing panel. Thank you so much. It's not something we get very often in medical education, so I'm grateful for it. One of the things that I was thinking about a lot as you guys were talking is how much of a cycle this is. We have planetary health issues, it leads to human health issues, and then it leads to human health treatment. And if we look at how wasteful human health treatment is in high-income countries, it's really stark. I want to be a psychiatrist, and I have patients who are absolutely, completely overwhelmed. And I just think about sometimes I tell them, don't do the dishes, like throw away the dishes, use paper plates because, you just need to get back on your feet. And that's something small and stupid, but if you think about how much it takes to save someone who has sepsis or other things that we do in the OR, trash and trash and trash. Right now in the political environment, values intervention is incredibly contentious. It just doesn't work. But then when we go to the very top of behavioral intervention, we're asking individual people to work even harder, often in a world that is causing their health issues in the first place. And so my question is, where do we ourselves, and also how do we encourage the people around us? Like, at what level do we intervene in the most effective and also compassionate way?
Thanks very much. We're going to take one question from the middle, and then we're going to get some responses.
Hello, my name is Alan Toulos. I represent Deloitte Consulting's International Development Practice. My question is for Carlos, but other members of the panel are happy to join in. Carlos, mostly my question is around if you can elaborate a little bit more on how to address the foundational values that you were talking about. You mentioned sort of linkages between filmmakers and poets. I think I'm also active in my local community as an activist, and one of the things that I've heard at this particular political moment is the need for more storytellers. And so then I think maybe a broader second question is, what can the public health community, the people in this room, how can they play a more active role in either linking with existing artists and storytellers or become more storytellers themselves? And also, given the context of there's been a lot of films about climate change and videos, like that already exists now and has not moved the needle, so what do we need to do to really change the paradigm? Thank you.
Okay, great questions. So we'll go down the row, and why don't each of you pick one of them to respond to? We'll make sure we cover some of both. Carlos, do you want to kick us off?
I'll address that last question right away, and it's a great question, and of course it's easier to give the diagnosis than to give the solution when we're talking about values. Definitely, these are not easy things to transform or shift, and I think part of it is that we need to think about these things as and approaches, right? There's not either or approaches, but it's very much an and approach. So I did mention the how, right? Some of the hows that we go about doing this, definitely through this storytelling component has a super strong role. I don't agree with you that it hasn't moved the needle completely, and I'll give you a dumb but simple example. There was a movie for kids, right, a while ago called Ice Age, and other movies that, like, what's the Charlotte's Web, and others where animals are kind of the center of those movies, and Bambi being another one. Bambi, is that the correct? Yeah. And when we grow up with these stories and we start caring for these animals, I had the fortune of going to when I was a little kid, a kindergarten in a school where we had farm animals, not to eat them, but to nourish them and care for them. And eventually that really instilled into how I look at animals, right? I'm not a vegetarian strictly, and it was tried to be, but that really did shape my values on how I understand my relationship with nature. And the story I want to tell is, when I go to Costa Rica, now everyone wants to see a sloth. Everyone wants to see and touch and pet. They can't touch and pet them, of course, but everyone feels so close to sloth and care for the sloth and don't want to see the sloth get run over, because there was a movie that there was some famous sloth. I have no idea which one it was. Now it's the capybara, apparently. The capybaras are famous now with little kids. And that eventually will impact how they understand nature. So although I want to say it hasn't shifted the needle to the point that these people are becoming, the next Cristiana Figueres of the world, they are shaping how they understand nature. So storytelling is important, and we should really push more of this. But storytelling apart, education plays a primary role, right? And what we instill, everything from kind of what's taught in primary school, what's taught in high school, and what's taught in then our universities, right, is super important to shape those values. And it's hard, for sure, right? When I talk about the planetary health education framework, there is this thing in the middle that talks about teaching about the interconnection within nature. How many of you, show of hands, would feel comfortable teaching that? Probably very few of you. There's one, James Hospitales over there from Trinidad and Tobago, says he's comfortable. He's probably been trained with that. Most of us don't. It's just the way we learn how to teach do not signal or put value in teaching about these things. But again, this is why you're all here, probably very interested in this topic, but this is why also we need to really change the scheme of what we think of when we talk about education. So there's still so much space for improvement there, but there are people like James that you could approach and say, how are you doing it? And then we start emulating what he's doing throughout the Caribbean to then apply it to your context. Obviously not in a cookie-cutter approach, but as an adaptation to what they're doing. So I'll say that there is so much space here to be done. And then the other thing I would say, and this is where I'll finish, is that policy change, and I said this in my presentation, can signal eventually value changes, right? Policy, although it's more of a stick or a carrot, down the line, if that maintains through time, it can change the way we value things. And I'm going to use the example of Costa Rica again. In the 1970s, we had these huge reforms on our laws and our constitutions, right? And a constitution that eventually put a value, an intrinsic value in nature. Even today, our constitution is shifting. Our constitution, the last constitutional shift that we had, is that water is a right, right? Not a commodity, it's a right. And that language down the line changes how people see the way they use and uptake and mistreat water, right? Then there's other frameworks like rights of nature frameworks, right? That they are deeply embedded in this value conversation. So I would say some of these things we need to really start changing quickly.
Thanks, Carlos. Catherine, would you like to address one of the questions that was asked?
Yeah, I just want to come in on the point. Thank you so much for the medical provider who made that point. I mean, this is not easy. I think these are really, common sense terms in a way, and we know where we need to go, but it's not easy to get there. And I think, even small changes, imperfect changes are still on the right track, and that can then lead to really large-scale system changes. And I think, there's some new research that shows that a lot of people are not just not hearing the message that climate change has health impacts, but not getting that message at all, that a lot of the communication on climate change doesn't really convey our link to human health. So I think that's really important in terms of an opportunity and where that messaging can come from, and really the opportunity to start at the K to 12 level or before, and TNC has some resources through Nature Lab that can be really applied in a planetary health context, but really thinking about the local level, how do you get people out in nature and seeing those connections, so it's so fundamental in the way they see the world and want to see their future world, so that we can build toward that collectively.
Thanks, Catherine. Cedric, what would you like to add?
Thanks very much, all. I don't have much to add up, but maybe on the first aspects, how do we engage and at what scale do we engage to be efficient? Well, that's a very, very tricky question, because as Carlos was presenting, what we try to achieve is a change in mindset, in practices, but also in paradigms and in values. And this is something very intrinsic to human spirit and to society. So this is a phenomenon that has to crystallize all over humanity to be fully ambitious, and there is no precise starting or ending point in such a process, meaning that it's difficult to spot a specific scale for action and advocacy. So I would say, do as much as you can. Do your best, depending on who you are and what you do, on the scale you have access to, and avoid possibly two methodological traps. I'm sorry, I'm very much on methodology today. The first one would be to be so convinced by your individual action that you will forget to escalate them at a larger scale, and so you will fail in advocacy. And on the contrary, if you are too focused on reaching a larger scale, you may forget what you can actually do at your level. So once again, the gold standard is somewhere in between.
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you for your patience. We're going to take the next two questions from the microphone over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dele Ogunseyitan at the University of California, Irvine. A wonderful panel, as usual. And thank you, Carlos, for explaining the two empty chairs. In my mind, I put the elephant in the room, in those chairs. And my question is that the fragmentation that you all talked about is within a group of committed people who may have similar values but different approaches: planetary health, One Health, global health, public health. But there is a polarization that we need solutions for. So when the US population empowered, withdrawing from the climate accord, from WHO, from maybe even Europe, we need solutions in the next 4 years, not just wait it out or change our language. So I'd like you to think about what kinds of solutions and tools we have at our disposal now, or that we need to cultivate as we try to re-engage the population and the policies that are going to make this very, very difficult in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Okay, so after that easy question, what's next?
Hi, good morning, great panel. My name is James Hospitalis. I'm the founder of the Earth Medic and Earth Nurse Foundation for Planetary Health, based in Trinidad and Tobago. And I've worked in international public health, global health, for about 30 plus years. My questions have to do, Carlos, I like the new slides, about values, about ethics, about hypocrisy that's going on. And I want to preface it by, Carlos, you said you're not religious, but you pointed to values being so important in improving planetary health. And I wrote an editorial for the Christian Journal of Global Health change the U to J, you get Christian Journal of Global Health, pointing to the problems we face are not going to be solved by science alone. The problems we face are about greed and selfishness and apathy and ignorance. So education does help. And so how do we bring some of the societal forces to bear on this? There are about 3 billion Christians, 2 billion Muslims, 1.5 billion Hindus, and 500 million Buddhists. All of those religions hold the environment as important. You have your dharmic duties if you're a Buddhist or a Hindu. You have karma, which is what goes around, comes around. If you pollute the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, you're going to get bad impacts. And in Christian field, you have the Pope's Laudato Si, among other things. Yet you did not touch on this at all, of how religion shapes values. So my first question is, how do you see us building bridges between faith communities and those of us in public health to have a better climate and a better chance for the future? Because really, I think they're natural allies. And the second question is, how do we get around the obscene, undue influence of the private sector in planetary health? 1,700 industry fossil fuel lobbyists in the last climate COP, 600 of them in the biodiversity COP, and I don't know how many in the plastic COP, torpedoing everything. This is wrong. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, by contrast, has an article that specifically limits that kind of involvement of the private sector, because you would not put an arms control dealer in charge of arms control, an arms dealer in charge of arms control talks, or a tobacco CEO in charge of cancer control talks. So we have a real problem in how these mechanisms are framed and structured, where we have an undue influence of the private sector. Those are my two questions: building bridges with faith communities and reducing the undue influence of health-harming industries. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 easy questions. Okay, Cedric, would you like to comment on either one of them to kick us off? And we have about 4 minutes. So just a brief comment would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you for this. Maybe I will try to focus on the first question regarding fragmentation and polarization, but, well, what are the solutions and tools? Well, if I knew about this, I would have said earlier. So obviously I don't, and I guess I'm not the only one, but maybe there is something in what I was mentioning in forgetting about trying to be leaders. Let's work together. We don't need people competing for taking the lead. We need them to understand each other and work together. So if one used to be a leader somewhere and is not anymore, but anyway, okay, drop it. Let anyone else take the lead and try to do your best to work with him. Reinvent cooperation dynamics, as I was saying, and then you have a chance that things will be moving forward. However, you will be stuck in regrets and inactions. So I guess just move forward.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Cedric. Catherine, can you share your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you for the easy questions. So I think we have an opportunity. I mean, you know, there's the national leadership, and then there's all of the other elected leaders and non-elected leaders, the informal and formal governance. And so I think often we focus our attention at a certain level, but there's a lot we can do in our local communities and our state level or provincial level. And so not losing sight of that and the importance of engaging and building that local, building on the local values and changing the systems that we can, and working then to change at a larger scale. I know also I've been to many COPs. I think they're effective in getting some very ambitious commitments, potentially, including on the funding that's really needed to make change happen. But they can also be very ineffective. And I just in the past few years, I think there's really been a change from science-based processes to sometimes very, very political processes. And that is a shame. And I know this year there were some anti-COPs, and that's sort of taking a different approach. I think we probably need a mix. We probably need all hands on deck and multiple solutions. But I just want to say, I mean, I would push back a little bit on the private sector framing. We consume, we consume Coca-Cola. I took a flight here. You know, we're not perfect. We're consumers of these products. So we do have to take some ownership of that as well. You know, and we're contributing to consumerism, and there are ways to shop locally, to buy, you know, used clothing, and it is very small individual actions, but it does add up. And I would say just sharing the lessons, the approaches that we're all using, and sort of cultivating that community of doing things differently. It takes time, but it is really powerful.
So maybe both the bottom-up as well as the top-down approach are going to be especially important. Okay, Carlos, what do you want to add?
Perhaps to Deli's question, and then I'll try to address James' question very quickly. But Deli, I think one of the things that I think we need to do, especially with the political landscape that is happening in a lot of countries, is we need to really start finding the common grounds. And instead of, in Spanish we have a saying, entrar con los tacos de frente. That means, and I don't know how to translate it in English, it's a soccer, of course, analogy. But it really means that sometimes we need to lay some of the priorities of our agenda down in order to focus on the priority in the agendas, the priority in our agendas that have common ground with the other side of the aisle. So for example, some policies that we know work for the environment and that we know work for our personal or political or environmental agendas might be things like incorporation of women in the labor force. That is something that across the aisle, mostly globally, is agreeable upon. That means giving women better choices, more access to health, more access to economic income, and that can really help drive change in part of our environmental challenges. So finding those common grounds that we can speak the same languages with policymakers across the aisle is fundamentally important, especially given in today's context. And to James' questions, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Just because I'm not a religious person or practice any faith-based, religion or whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that I'm not fully aware of the influence that religions have over my life. My values, I grew up in a Catholic country, and most of our values are driven by a Catholic understanding of what the world is and why we're here. And the way that we should then bridge these communities, the faith-based communities and the scientific-based communities or these environmental communities is definitely we need to start with dialogue. We at the Planetary Health Alliance, we have an initiative called the Constellation Project in which we're trying to build these dialogues to see where are these common grounds. And again, the principle is the same, is finding the common grounds and starting from there, not starting from where the differences are. When you start from differences, you immediately burn that bridge. And that's what we need to avoid in every conversation that we're having today, right? With everyone, we're facing each other. It's just, I have one more minute. Oh, it gave me an extra minute, you see that? But it's funny because I am obsessed with watching CNN, and it's a weird obsession, but there's this anchor, Abby Phillips, she has this show, and at the start of the show she says like, people in America are not talking together, but here in this show, we are. And they're always fighting, you know? I don't know if you've ever seen, they're like, that's not the point, Abby. You shouldn't be fighting on TV. You should be addressing this in many different forms. But anyway, just wanted to throw, don't watch Abby Phillips if they're fighting. It just gets right ridiculous. Anyway, that was my last point. That was the worst thing to finish on, but I'll take it.
My gosh.
The clock is going backwards now.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up the session. Any of us are happy to chat further during the lunch break and beyond while we're all here, or reach out by email, et cetera, if we can be helpful. I do want to remind everyone that there are a new set of posters up downstairs. So during the lunch break in the next hour and a half, please have a peruse, talk to folks, and then we'll come back for afternoon sessions. I think it's at 2 o'clock. So thanks everyone for being here.